Welcome back to the Titanium Hangar. This is Mike, and today I want to talk to you about Centurions. Kinder Centurions, modern Centurions, and the problems with collecting both vintage and modern. Oddly enough, there are different problems for each one. They only share one similar common issue. We're going to take a look at this beloved, short-lived franchise and toys going along with it coming up. First thing about Centurions is there was a 4-issue run of the comic book back in the 80s, and that is one form of media. You've got to have media to support the franchise, especially in the 80s when it was so competitive. But what I really liked the most was the cartoon. This cartoon actually felt a lot more mature than a lot of the other cartoons of the 80s, and they didn't talk down to the kids, and it sort of elevated kids with vocabulary, with scenarios and thought process, and a lot of things going on were very advanced in the show. So it was a good show. It captured my interest. I was excited about watching the show all of the time. Well, for about a year. So collecting the vintage toys can be a challenge in itself. The biggest challenge for collecting Kinder Centurions, the vintage versions, collecting those, is availability and price. Of course, you're not going to be able to go on there and get a traumatizer any day of the week or every different weapon system complete, and when they do pop up, they're very expensive. Now, one thing I do want to point out about the vintage toys is that you can get the main characters pretty simple. With a quick look on eBay right now, you can get any of the main characters with their weapon systems complete for about $100 or less for a Max or a Jake or an Ace, and that's a pretty simple part. So when it comes to vintage collectors, it's real easy to get the main figures. That's the easiest part. Once you get deeper into collecting Centurions in the vintage Kinder line, getting the later run weapon systems like Slingshot or Max Ray and Max Ray's Seabat. So these are the ones that start to become challenging and hard to get, and those are the ones that vintage collectors clamor for the most. So one of the problems collecting vintage, one of the issues collecting vintage Centurions is getting the later short-run weapon systems and the traumatizer, and all of those are really hard to get. Now, it doesn't mean that they're impossible, and with time, effort, and enough money, you're going to track these down over time. But that is a problem, and it's a problem that we shouldn't have when it comes to modern. We get to talk about modern Centurion collecting. But I do want to point out that from my experience, it seems like there's not very many Centurion collectors out there. There's not a huge number of Centurions collectors, and definitely not like Star Wars or Masters of the Universe or G.I. Joe or Transformers or any of those larger lines. And I would venture to say maybe only a couple thousand people that collect it, and they're not all completists. So what do vintage collectors actually clamor for? What would a vintage collector like to have in their collection that they don't? And that is unproduced, unreleased, and we're talking later in the line figures and accessories and weapon systems. So starting out, we're talking about the Rex Charger Glow in the Dark and the John Thunder. These are figures that vintage collectors would love to have in their collection. So looking at this, it would almost make sense. These are the figures that need to get made for modern collectors. But when we get to modern, you're going to find out it's a flip-flop and the complete opposite and a reverse, and I'll explain why. But for me personally, I would love to get my hands on these. The prototypes, when they sell for $5,000 to $7,000 for one figure, and the weapon systems, they're almost impossible to get even the prototypes for. You would think that if any company were to make these, or even an individual, an enthusiast, would make these, that it would be extremely popular amongst the community and everybody would be on board buying them. Pretty much no matter the price. And I say no matter the price, we're not talking thousands. If someone was willing to make them in the $100 to $200 range for ultra rare low run items, remember, that's a good deal versus $6,000. Enter modern collecting. So before we get into talking about the modern collecting, I do want to point out something real quick. When it comes to the Ramen Toys 80 Commanders, the 80s Commanders are not Centurions. They are 80s Commanders. They have their own likenesses. They have their own names. They have their own faces. They have their own backstories, bios, and all that stuff. So when I refer to these as modern Centurions, that's me calling them that, the creators, the Ramen Toy, did not name them Centurions, and they are not Centurions. That's just my take on them. So anyway, getting into this modern-looking figures of Centurion, this is bringing them down to a normal scale, so it sort of fixes one of the problems. One of the problems with collecting modern Centurions, or pretty much trying to collect vintage Centurions and place them with modern figures, they don't scale together very well. So there's a lot of issues that goes along with that. But if you're a vintage collector and you want modern iterations of your stuff, it might not get made because it's not going to sell to the modern collectors. Because modern collectors want everything to be cohesive in their collection, which makes sense. Like myself, when I was really young in the 80s and I wanted everything to be 3.75 inch scale, I struggled with Centurions being so big back then. And nowadays, the vintage are too big, so modern figures have to be smaller. And for that, they're not going to match the vintage. Making things make sense in my head, it almost feels like Bravestar and Centurions are about the same scale. Although Bravestar is a little bit bigger, so we try to talk about, okay, so modern day is 1/12 scale. Are these 1/10 or 1/8 scale, 1/9 scale, something along the lines right there. But these almost scale together. They don't exactly. Bravestar is bigger, but Bravestar is definitely not in the 12-inch range. So there's something in the middle when it comes to these guys. Scale is an issue for a modern collector. So we got Ramen Toy making their 80s commanders, and I have to say that out of the gate, they did a phenomenal job. Now, I will point out this to everybody. Originally, the face sculpts were not a hit with fans, and Ramen Toy had changed that. They sent out a change in head sculpts. I got my new head sculpts for the original commanders, and then new head sculpts for the second run. And now there's going to be a third run, which is going to be yet even different. I don't know all the differences yet, but with all of that, the main three are going to be available again, and it's exciting to have modern iterations of something that looks like Centurions, although it's called 80s Commanders. So this is now our chance to get some of these dream figures that never got made before, dream weapon systems that have never been made before in modern scale. So we have the Apache Commander up for pre-order right now at Ramen Toy, and I'm excited for it. I've got 2 pre-ordered. I'm thinking about getting a third. That's how excited I am for this. But I do want to point out that modern collectors don't really care as much for these other figures, these later figures later in the line. That's more of a vintage collector type of figure, which is surprising me. And I was really shocked when the original Apache Commander with a Rolling Thunder weapon system failed. It didn't get enough orders for collectors to support this so Ramen Toy could make it. So I'm shocked at that. I'm surprised. But now I kind of step back and I'm not as surprised, especially after having a couple of conversations with Ace and him explaining to me some of the sales numbers and things going on with that. Now I'm starting to understand a little bit more. So my personal take on this whole situation with the issues with collecting modern is that modern collectors don't really want a full deep line of figures and accessories and all of that. They basically just want the main 3, and that's all they want. For the most part, we're talking about the broad sales for the broad market. And so we're talking about collectors of Star Wars Black Series. We're talking about collectors of G.I. Joe Classified or Marvel Legends and all of them that would just like to have a segment of a shelf to have some Centurion-looking figures on it, but don't want to collect the whole line. This is where we kind of get that crossover of vintage collectors that want a deeper toy line. So now we get into something called the Phantom Foil, and I gotta say, Marvel Legends collectors, G.I. Joe Classified collectors, and other collectors out there that sort of have heard of Centurions have no idea what this is. And I will even tell you, before this was made, I didn't really know what it was myself. I had to do some research to figure it out. And I'm going to tell you what this Phantom Foil, which is a really awesome weapon system, we're going to go deep into it, but I'm going to tell you what it's all about. This is originally the Phantom Fan, and it's spelled with F instead of a PH, so that's kind of cool too. And this was in the show, but it was never made into a toy. And there was never a prototype shown of it, although they did have a couple of pieces of the prototype that leaked out, but not an actual full-on prototype. So this entire Phantom Foil that's being made by Ramen Toy was their own creation, simply based off of these pictures and the animation, which is awesome and exciting in itself. So talk about a weapon system that's actually an urban legend, as something that has never really been made, never saw production, but even the prototypes are so rare that they haven't even been cataloged. There's really no way to even see the prototypes and everything about it and all the features or what Kenner had planned with it. So this is what they have planned. Now this is an alternate configuration that you can put your Phantom foil in, and this is on your 80s Commander. This is really awesome. This is really cool. And the more I look at this, the more excited I get about this weapon system. This is the first add-on or additional weapon system aside from what comes with the 80s Commanders. And so here it is with the standard. You do have actual spring missiles that shoot out. So there are gimmicks on this. One of the complaints about the figures was no gimmicks. And then hinged canopy and then all this good stuff. So with that, the problem is with this is that vintage collectors would love to have this, but it's not made to fit vintage figures. There's not a vintage 80s Commander made or a retro series 80s Commander. This only fits your modern figures. I would love to have some sort of an adapter that you could adapt, maybe plug into the system into a vintage figure and clip this on. You know, maybe we're just circumventing the system a little bit. Obviously it'd be a little undersized, underscaled as a system, but that would be awesome if there was a way to do it. In fact, there might be a way and I just don't know, but I would love to see that. And when I get mine, I'm definitely going to fabricate a way. If I can't just do it out of the box, I'll fabricate a way for it to connect to my vintage figure. It's one of the exciting things to have a new weapon system for a vintage figure. That would be great. And it would be cool to have this as a dual mandate system. Alright, so let's get into talking about this land drone. So this is something else that vintage collectors clamor for, a traumatizer. Now, I know that my complete traumatizer I paid $500 for. And I quoted, I said it out loud, I'm out of my mind spending $500 on a traumatizer. Well, now they go for a lot more than that. I think they're over $1,000 for a complete one. And so with that, it's getting really expensive. So this is definitely a great option. Right now, it's $70. You're not going to confuse this with a vintage because it's so different. But it's got so many improvements. It's really cool. And the improvements over the original on this, it's got light up, light effects, it's got blast effects. It doesn't have to completely bend over to actually fire the missile. It has the missile that actually comes out. It just slides out. And a lot of cool stuff. I do have 2 videos reviewing this on my channel, so you can check it out. And it's really awesome and really exciting and a whole lot of fun. And with that, this is something for $70 right now, the early bird. You can build yourself a little army of this for half the price of trying to track down and buy a vintage traumatizer. Here's a picture from Ramen Toy of a small army of traumatizers. Wouldn't that be so much fun? So exciting to have this. I'm still trying to decide how many more I'm going to buy. Think it's going to be 3. Really exciting stuff. And for this, these are getting made. It's a reality, and it's something that's coming pretty soon. Now, one thing that's already available for sale is the Antagonist Cyborg. This is their take on a hacker, and it's a very good figure. One of the things I didn't realize was that it does actually connect with the traumatizer, or I'm sorry, the land drone, and it will connect via magnets on the inside. Really cool, really exciting. And I think they upped their game with the magnet connection. So instead of the magnets being sort of glued to the exterior, they're inside of it. So there's no chance of them pulling out. It's something they learned from their Silverhawks. And with that, they're learning as they go and making improvements. And so each figure and each release has some more interesting features with it. And that's so exciting about a toy company to do that. But this is available, and pretty soon we're going to see their take on, is it Antagonist Scientist or something like that? Anyway, that's the next one, which is sort of a take on Doc Terror. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm really excited about Ramen Toys. This is everything I have for Ramen Toy collection so far. I'm excited for it. I'm also excited for Silverhawks, all that kind of stuff. But I want to say that the modern collecting shares one thing with vintage collecting, is that they are pricey in a relative way. Vintage figures in Centurions are expensive, and in the weapon systems, some of those are really expensive, and then tracking down traumatizers and doom strafers and all that kind of stuff. that can get a little bit pricey. Well, quite pricey, actually. This is expensive versus, say, collecting a handful of figures for Marvel Legends or Star Wars Black Series or G.I. Joe Classified. They're more expensive because of the low production runs. And every one of them, aside from the regular regular 80s Commanders, are unique molds. Nothing is being shared. Therefore, the expensive tooling is why these things cost so much. $70 is a lot of money, but in the relative terms, there's no other options that are out there, and there probably won't be for a while. So why doesn't Hasbro tackle these? And I'm going to tell you why. Because there's no media for this. There's probably not even discussions for media for this anytime soon. And I'm also going to tell you a current issue that Hasbro's dealing with that will probably make them think twice about taking on a Visionaries, a Mask, or a Centurions for media. There's currently a Dungeons & Dragons movie out there, and it is, from all the reviews I've heard, a fantastic movie. It's a good movie. Whether or not you are a fan of the franchise or you're not a fan of the franchise, you can just go watch and enjoy a good movie. From what I hear, I haven't seen it yet. I look forward to seeing it eventually whenever I find it on a streaming service, but it seems like a pretty good movie. With that, the toys aren't selling. The merchandise is not selling. It's not moving. The figures that they made from this movie sit on pegs. And it's funny because I didn't even notice when the movie came out because the figures never moved. The movie comes out and has an opening and all of that kind of stuff, and they don't move. They're still sitting on pegs. Because I do my regular rounds and nothing has changed. You would think that at least one collector would buy one of each. None are selling in my area at all. They're not getting pulled off the pegs and getting restocked. I even asked people that work there. The thing is that this is not driving. The media is not even driving this toy line. What I will say about the vintage style toys based off of the old show from the 80s sold really well in the beginning, but then tapered off. And a lot of this was due to quality concerns. A lot of this was due to the packaging, not even able to see the figure and all that kind of stuff. And so with that, we're already starting to see these on clearance at retail. I saw them this past weekend. And this does not give Hasbro execs, whatever you want to think of them, confidence for an old 80s franchise that has no modern media. So when it comes to modern collecting, then really all we have is the boutique creators such as Ramen Toy or a Super 7 or one of them out there making these right now. Ramen Toy is making the 80s Commanders, and they are fantastic. I'm very happy with my entire collection, and I look forward to every one of these releases, and I hope that we continue to support these so they continue. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Are you in on these? Do you understand why they cost $70 for the early bird pricing, $100 if you wait for them to come out? And do you understand or have a better understanding of why modern collectors aren't as excited about these rare items getting made and vintage collectors are super stoked? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Teddy Hanger out.
Rex to Skyvault. I'm gonna need all the power of Gatling Guard.
Assembling now.